You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 143 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. For this episode, we're back to sharing some Joe and Charlie, The Big Book Comes Alive, and this one will be covering steps 6 and 7. So summing up Joe and Charlie episodes in relation to the AA Big Book, Episode 109 covers the doctor's opinion and steps 1 and 2. So continuing on step 2 with episode 115 on There is a Solution and the Spiritual Experience. And concluding step 2 with episode 121 on We Agnostics. From there, we moved on to episode 127 with How It Works and step 3. And then circling back to what started off the Joe and Charlie episodes 63, 68, 71, and 75, all covering step 4. And just recently, we've been getting back into this, and step 5 into action was on episode 135. So here we are at steps 6 and 7, which is just 2 small paragraphs in the big book. And so I included both of those in this recording. I did find a reading from Voices of Recovery on step 6, and this comes from April 12th on page 103. Wanting our lives to change is not the same as being actually ready for change. The negative patterns uncovered in our inventory represents a lifetime of ingrained beliefs, attitudes, and habits of behavior, and that comes from Sex Addicts Anonymous, page 40. It took me a while to understand the significance of the 6th step. Being ready to have my defects removed requires the admittance that I have flaws. While I created an inventory in my 4th step and admitted the nature of my wrongs in my 5th, it was not until this step that I realized that I had to truly accept that there were parts of me that were not as healthy as I'd like to believe. This is also a gentle step in that it only requires willingness to have my higher power remove these flaws. It is very similar in nature to the 2nd step, and acknowledging that God has the power to help me in this task, and then readying myself to try it out. It is a preparatory step for the work that is to follow. This step for me was another level of surrender, relinquishing the idea that I have the control or ability to change certain things in my life. It was a time for me to let go of even more of the reins of my life and open myself to following the will of the God of my understanding. And the meditation? I am flawed, but that is part of being human. I can accept this and ready myself to let my higher power remove all these defects of character so I can become a healthier person. Really great reading, and one of the reasons why I chose this is it does talk about step 4 and step 5 leading into this step. So being able to find the things in step 4, talk about them in step 5, and then expand on it in step 6. I also loved in this reading the connection to step 2, and that this was a willingness step. And with step 7, I see that as an expansion of step 3, turning our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. So this is taking that a step further and asking that higher power to help remove our character defects. So like I mentioned, step 6 and 7 in the big book is only 2 paragraphs, so this is a short recording. After the recording, I'll be talking a little bit more about the Bay Area Giving Thanks event that is coming up in the beginning of November. I also have a few songs to play, and I'll be reading some listener feedback. And so now, without further ado, here is Joe and Charlie, The Big Book Comes Alive, covering steps 6 and 7 in the chapter Into Action. I hope you enjoy it.
Now, if you've done steps 4 and 5, you've done a lot of work up to this point. You're probably tired. The Big Book's going to give you a little rest stop. Returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour. He didn't say 62 days, did he? Every time he mentions time, it's right now. Carefully reviewing what we've done, we thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. We don't know Him yet, but we know Him better. Taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals or steps, we ask if we've omitted anything, for we're building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? And again, he's referring to this wonderfully effective spiritual structure, the building of the personality change, sufficient to recover from alcoholism. Step 1, willingness was the foundation. Step 2, believing was the cornerstone. Step 3, he told us, is an arch through which we'll pass to freedom, and step 3 was the keystone of that arch. Now we've put 2 more stones in place. We're gradually building this spiritual experience as we go through the steps. Page 76. If we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can He now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. That's all of step 6. And if you'll notice, he didn't say a thing in there about defects of character. Step 6 says we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. But here he didn't say anything about defects of character. What he did say are those things which we have admitted are objectionable. Now surely, as we took our inventory and we looked out in that old 5th column and we saw that old selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, and inconsiderate human being we had become, when we could see that those are the things that cause us to do the things that creates harms and hurts for other people and causes them to retaliate and causes us to resent, that those are the things that cause us to have all the fears that we got, that those are the things that cause us to hurt other people sexually and otherwise, then surely that type of character has now become objectionable to us. And if so, and if we're willing to have God remove those objectionable things, then we've already done step 6. But please don't make the mistake I did, because I was convinced that God is all-powerful, and I still am today. And I was convinced that He can do anything He wants to, and I'm still convinced of that today. And I thought all I would need to do would turn to God and say, okay, God, here I am, warts and all. Zap me and give me the $29.95 special. And I'd never have to worry about that again. But I found out that it doesn't work that way. Because if I want God to remove those things from me, then I have to be willing to do my part. And sometimes when we see those things, even though we can see they're objectionable to us, sometimes we're still not willing to turn them loose. Now, we human beings are funny things. Sometimes we would rather sit in today's pain and suffering, because we've kind of learned how to handle that. We would rather sit in today's pain and suffering than take a chance on changing in the future, because we don't know what future change will bring. If I'm going to have to get rid of my selfishness, then how am I going to get what I want? If I'm going to have to get rid of my dishonesty, how in the world am I going to make a living? I knew nothing about honesty when I came here. If I'm going to have to get rid of my self-seeking, frightened attitude, well, where am I going to get the courage to do the things I need to do? If I'm going to have to get rid of my inconsideration of other people and start considering them, then who's going to consider me? And sometimes we would rather sit in today's pain and suffering than take a chance on changing. And again, I went to my sponsor and I said, I don't think I can do step 6 and 7. He said, why? I said, because if God removes all my character defects, I'm not going to have any personality left at all, period. And he said, you're about 100% right. But he said, what you don't understand is if God takes those things away from you, they're going to have to be replaced with something else. And he said, what replaces them will be so much better than anything you've ever had before. You'll wonder why it took you so long to get around to asking God to replace them. But he said, Charlie, you'll never know that unless you're willing to take the chance. And the book tells me, can he now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something and will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. Prayer again. Every one of these action steps recognizes self cannot overcome self. We're always going to have God's help. And through the help of my sponsor and by asking God to help me be willing, I finally became willing to turn loose of those things. Now, when ready, we say something like this. My Creator, I'm now willing you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character. Whoop, whoop. We're in step 7 now. And step 7 says shortcomings, and here he calls them defects. You see what he's done to us? He interchanged these words back and he's confused the hell out of us. That's what he did. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. We have then completed step 7. And like I said, I thought all I'd have to do would be ask God to take them away, and they would automatically be gone. But then once again, God's not going to allow another hole in my personality. I got enough holes in my head already. If this old selfishness is going to disappear, if God's going to take it away, He can't leave a blank in my personality. It'll have to be replaced, and the only thing that can replace it is unselfishness. And unselfishness does not come automatically. If I want God to take away my selfishness, then I must, in every situation that comes up, gather all the willpower I can and get all the help I can from God and start trying to practice unselfishness. And that's very, very difficult for me to do. But over a period of time, as God removes and as I practice the opposite, slowly, 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 the old idea dies. And a new idea takes its place. And over a period of years, I have become a relatively unselfish human being. Practice, 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 practice. If I want Him to take away my dishonesty, then I must, in every situation that comes up, with all the willpower I can muster and all the help I can get from God, I must practice being honest. And my God, it was almost impossible for me to do that in the beginning. But with God's help, I started trying to practice honesty. I quit lying so much. I quit stealing. I quit doing those things with God's help. And slowly, slowly, God removed the dishonesty, and I became a more honest human being. Practice, practice, practice. If I want Him to take away my self-seeking, frightened attitude, then I've got to muster up all the courage I can, and with God's help, force myself to do those things I was afraid to do. And just as importantly, to force myself to quit doing those things I was afraid to quit. And slowly, the old idea dies, and a new one takes its place. Today I'm a human being that acts most of the time with faith and courage. Fear doesn't bother me very much anymore. But it takes time to do this. Practice. If I won't even take away my inconsideration of others, then I must force myself, with all the strength I can gather and everything I can get from God, to start trying to consider other people first, their needs and their wants and their desires. Damn near impossible for people like me to do. But as we practice at it, it slowly becomes a habit. And the old idea dies and a new one takes its place. And my sponsor was 100% right. You know, life is so much better since I've become an unselfish human being. Life is so much better since I've become an honest person. Life is so much better since I've become a person with faith and courage. Life is so much better when I've become a considerate human being. And he was right. I wondered why it took me so long to do it, you know. Now, God's not going to do this for us by himself. You know, he gave us self-will. He said, you can keep it as long as you want it. He said, I'll let you die on it if that's what you want to do. We must do our part. And as we practice over and over, God removes and we practice the opposite. We change into different human beings. I have been reborn. I have been reborn. I'm not what I was when I came to the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm beginning to realize now what the book means when it said some of us tried to hold on to our old ideas. And the result was nil until we let go completely. You can't become selfish and unselfish at the same time. You're going to be one of the two. You can't become honest and dishonest at the same time. You're going to be one of the two. Always. We have to do our part and work at it. I think we're the luckiest people in the world. You know, most people out there are sick. Most of them are going to the grave sick, not even knowing they're sick. We not only know what's wrong with us, we found that out in steps 4 and 5. Through steps 6 and 7, we have a way to change that situation. And we get to live 2 lifetimes in 1 lifetime. Most people never get that opportunity. Now make no mistake about this. If you buy into this idea, then that means from this day on, you are responsible for what you are. If you stay selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, and inconsiderate, that must mean that's the way you want to be. Because we don't have the luxury of blaming it on Mother anymore. Can't blame it on Daddy. Can't blame it on God, and can't blame it on society. If we stay screwed up, it's because we want to stay screwed up. We don't have to be that way. Most people don't get this chance, Joe.
You know, there's always a paradox in AA, isn't there? Everything's exactly opposite what I thought it was going to be. The paradox here, to give you an idea of what a paradox is, how many of you have ever called your sponsor so you could listen? A few hands. Most of us call so we can talk, right? It's supposed to be listening.
You end up listening, usually.
You should. The paradox in this 2 steps is this. They took the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters to do steps 1 and 2. 3.5 pages to do step 3, 8 pages to do step 4, 4 pages to do step 5, and a whole chapter with working with others. The paradox is this, that 2 of the biggest steps in all of Alcoholics Anonymous are on 2 little paragraphs. That's the paradox. These steps here are the tools of change. They're also the tools of acceptance. There was a movement here a while back about acceptance. Like people just walk around accepting things, you know. I never could do that. Acceptance is not an event. It's a process. And this is the process. 6 and 7. 2 of the biggest steps in all of Alcoholics Anonymous. And where do these come from? These are the 2 steps that Bill added to the tenets of the Oxford group. And there was a story in that other big book about this guy named Saul, S-A-U-L. Saul was riding his, way I read it, was riding his ass on the way to Damascus.
That's what it said.
That's what it said. Big bolt of lightning come down and knocked him off his ass on his ass. That's the way I read it. Saul standing there dusting himself off. And a big booming voice said, "Hey, Saul, can we talk?" He got his attention. He said, "Yeah, we can talk. What do you want to talk about?" Maybe alcoholism got our attention too. He said, "Saul, you're a very selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, and inconsiderate individual, and you've harmed an awful lot of people," basically. So he told him that, "and I want you to not do that anymore." He said, "Well, how do you not do that?" He basically said, "Do 6 and 7. If you'll do those things, then you'll change. And when you change, we'll call you Paul." And we all know that Paul was one of the greatest writers the world's ever known. And sometime in Corinthians, this guy asked Paul a question. Said, "Hey, Paul," said, "what is the secret to life?" Everybody wants to know what the secret to life is. And he said, "The secret to life is daily dying." The old Saul had to die, so the new Paul came alive. 6 and 7, two of the biggest steps in all of Alcoholics Anonymous. By the time I got to 6 and 7, a little doubt began to come into my mind. Can he really do this? I see what I have become. Can he really change me? Really? A little doubt became in. And I had to reaffirm a statement I read earlier. God either is or he isn't. Either he can or he can't. What's my choice going to be? And I had to choose to believe that he could. And I set about to do that. And see, I see this kind of change, but I seen what I had become. The change is now I'm trying to become that which God intends for me to be. 6 and 7 is the tools of change. Then the tools of acceptance. I have accepted what I become because I'm not that way anymore. Thank God. Through 6 and 7. Two of the biggest steps in all of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Tell me about the time you bought the salad.
Oh, yeah.
As an example.
Yeah, an example. I went to the grocery store one time. Phyllis was working. I liked her being self-supporting also. And I went by the Safeway in our area and picked up some salad dressing and some salad stuff to go home and cook a steak for her when she come home from work. And I was paying up at the cash register, and this little girl gave me change for a $20 bill, but I had only given her 10. And I stood right there and watched her. And I took the money and put it in my pocket and walked out the door. See, I thought it was worth a lot more than that. I sold out for $10. I mean, I thought it was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I got out in my car and I felt about that big. And I got back out of my car, went back in there, and I said, "You counted me up too much change. Here's your $10 back." She said, "Boy, I sure do appreciate that." Said, "I would have had to pay for that, you know." And I said, "Well," she said, "Thank you for being honest." And I said, "Well, I'm a member of a fellowship that requires me to be honest." And she said, "I've never heard of a fellowship like that before." And I said, "Well, I haven't either." But until then. So the next time I walked out, I felt good again. $10 little, sell it out for that, being dishonest for $10. God, I thought it was worth a lot more than that.
Practice, 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 and practice. And slowly those things become habitual. And the old dies and a new one takes its place. Just that simple.
Yeah, I love this entire series on The Big Book Comes Alive. Joe and Charlie covering all these steps is incredibly eye-opening, and from here we will be moving on to steps 8 and 9. And I can't remember how long that segment is, but I know that we are currently on disc 9 out of 10 for the entire series. And so the next disc and a half will cover steps 8, 9, 10, and 11. So like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I did want to cover the Bay Area Giving Thanks event that is coming up in November. And this is a fundraiser for the International Service Organization. And it is also a time for us to celebrate our fellowship and have an afternoon of getting together. So anyone here in the Bay Area is welcome to join that. It is open to partners as well. The information for that is up on the Bay Area SAA website under updates and events. The flyer for that is there as well. The flyer has information on how to donate to the ISO. We do have another committee meeting coming up this weekend, and I will be asking for the donation information that I can send out to people outside of the Bay Area that want to contribute to our fundraiser. So stay tuned for that. So thinking about steps 6 and 7, I had talked about my spiritual playlists that I had made over the years. There were 2 of my mixes that I was making while I was working on steps 6 and 7 for the first time. One titled Sweet Surrender, and I've already played the John Denver song that is named after on a few episodes of the podcast. But I did also want to cover a few songs that talked about being humble. With step 7, humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. So the act of being humble, I found some songs around that, and I've already mentioned a few times on the podcast that I have songs around surrender. For this episode, I'm going to be focusing on some songs around humility and being humble. The first one is the song I Go Humble from Björk. And Björk is an Icelandic singer. I've originally found her when she was singing for the Sugar Cubes and have really loved her solo career. And this was a B-side for one of her singles. So here is the song I Go Humble. Love Björk. Her voice is unique and incredible. One of the other mixes that I made around this time is called I Am Blessed, and that comes from an Eric Bibb song. And just thinking of Eric Bibb, I was chatting with someone after one of our meetings, and he had mentioned that he really loved the music that I share on the podcast, and especially the music of Eric Bibb. So I'll be sharing some Eric Bibb momentarily, but for right now I wanted to focus on the song Humbled Me by Norah Jones.
You humble me, Lord. You humble me, Lord. I'm on my knees, empty. You humble me, Lord. You humble me, Lord. So please, please forgive me. You humble me.
Again, that's such an awesome song. Yeah, at the time that I was making this, I was listening to a lot of Norah Jones, and this song in particular stood out. So back to Eric Bibb, there was one song that I've been wanting to play on the podcast for a while, and this one's a song of motivation, and it is called Just Keep Going On.
Just keep going on. Just keep going on. Just keep going on. Just keep going on. Take every knock as a boost, and every stumbling block as a stepping stone. Lift up your head, hold your own. Just keep going on, I say. Just keep going on. Just keep going on. Just keep going on. Just keep going on.
Love the message in that one, and just feeling upbeat, similar to one of his others that I played. Don't ever let nobody drag your spirit down. I forget what episode I played that on, but yeah, I love Eric Bibb. So before moving on to listener feedback, This past weekend, I took my son to go see Spirit Box, Gojira, and Korn, and it was such a fun show. Gojira stole the show for me, and they did play their version of SAA, which they played at the Olympics, and I played here on the podcast. But they had a sound clip before they actually took the stage, and they had the vocal part from their song Shooting Star, and this has just been going through my head all week. And I wanted to share that here, and this is the very end of the song. The words are, "Everlasting love is ever growing. Hang on to what you have and let it grow. Everlasting love is ever dying. It's in the past. You have to let it go." So here is Gojira with The Shooting Star. Love that. And yeah, the show was spectacular and had a lot of fun. A lot of people that I knew went to that show. I was only able to meet up with a few, but it was still a lot of fun. So with that, I did want to turn to some listener feedback. And we did get a comment on the previous episode 142. And this was with Scott G. This was on YouTube. A quick and simple comment. 23 years? Congratulations. That is impressive. Talking about 23 years of Scott's sobriety. So moving on to emails. This is one that came in about a month ago. And it says, "Hi, Jason. I enjoy your podcast as a recovering person in AA with long-term sobriety. My idea for a podcast episode is to talk to you as a sibling of an incarcerated sex addict. I've got 38 years in AA and codependency recovery and have active service positions in the district and home group. My sibling had a highly publicized investigation and trial that affected his family. He's experienced a spiritual awakening as part as his process, but obviously he can't speak it from jail. I thought it might be interesting for your listeners as it's a little different from having a spouse who is a sex addict. I think I can talk about going through the stages of grief and now reconciling the recovery of my brother with his past behaviors by using the steps. Signed, C." And yes, I think this would be an excellent topic and would love to have you as a guest, and I will be reaching out to you very shortly. And I've mentioned on the past few episodes that as the year comes to a close, October, November, and December, life becomes really busy. So trying to figure out my scheduling in here has been a little bit difficult. But yes, I do wish to have you as a guest. I've been toying with the idea of having my own sister here on the podcast. She and I were talking about doing an episode back in the early part of the year, and we haven't been able to connect our schedules, but hearing from a sibling's perspective might be an interesting way. So yes, I would love to have you on as a guest. And here is another one. "Hi, Jason. I've been listening to the podcast for several months now. I actually started listening to the podcast prior to entering the rooms of SAA, and the knowledge and vulnerability encouraged me to take the leap and start my journey to recovery. I'm also a musician and fellow metalhead. While I don't make shared interests a priority when building friendships, it's always cool to know that others in the program listen to metal and find the intensity to be healing and sometimes spiritual. I primarily listen to death metal and black metal and love the playlists you put together. I'd be interested in being a podcast guest and would love to talk to you about metal and going to shows or playing music, guitar specifically, and how those aid me in my recovery. Thanks for taking the time to read. Signed, B." And yes, this would be really, really cool. I've got another guest, former guest of the podcast, that wanted to talk about the relation of making music and the creativity involved in that as being part of recovery. And so I love hearing that from other guests and would love to have you on. And yeah, always love talking metal. So really great to connect with other metalheads and really look forward to that. And yeah, I'll be putting out an email to you very shortly, and hopefully we can schedule something soon. So I do believe that gets us caught up on emails, and if I happen to miss your email, I apologize. I've got quite a few to go through, and I think I've managed to get to all of them. But please let me know if I haven't read anything on the podcast that you would like me to read, or if you've reached out to be a guest. So I know that we have someone in the UK that I've emailed, and we're going to try to find a time. And again, my weekends have been booked up, and that's usually the best time for me to record with the 8-hour time difference. So yeah, I do have lots of ideas for guests coming up, and just need to get to scheduling them. For next week's episode, we did record an Experience, Strength, and Hope share at the Noon Zoom room a few weeks ago, and I'll be sharing that as a podcast episode. In a couple of weeks, I'm also going to be recording a first step at one of those meetings as well to be shared. So hopefully in between those, I'll be able to schedule some recordings and have some new guests here for you. I've been mentioning that I'll be slowing down the release schedule towards the end of the year to 2 to 3 episodes per month rather than 4 because of the craziness of the year. Anyway, with that, I'm going to close out this episode. If you wanted to leave feedback for the podcast, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. Or if you wanted to get a hold of me personally, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And thank you so much for tuning into this episode. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.